Great. All right, I think we should get going. Hello, everybody, and happy post-Thanksgiving. Hope everybody had a nice turkey day or whatever your main meal is for Thanksgiving, but hope it was enjoyable and it was nice seeing family and friends. My name's Hugh Bleemer. I'm with the Chester County Community Foundation, and I'd like to welcome Emily Abels, Peter Temple, who are going to give a good presentation this morning, and I think that you'll find it very interesting, and we'll hold off. Well, I don't know. Peter and Emily, would you like questions as you're presenting or at the end of the presentation? What do you think is best? What are you most comfortable with? Either way.
We want an exchange, so we'd like questions as we go along.
Good.
But at the end of it, we're going to have a lot of opportunity to have interaction. So
excellent. So if anybody does have a question, though, through the presentation, either, there's a raise your hand feature or just unmute yourself and interrupt. And hopefully we'll have a good interactive presentation. So I'm going to turn it over. One mention is that I am the program manager for the Get On Board program, which the Chester County Community Foundation sponsors. We are looking for young people who are looking to serve on Chester County nonprofits, and we will get them trained, provide them with a coach, and have them serve on a nonprofit that's of interest to them in Chester County. If anybody knows of any folks that are looking to get involved, please give the foundation a call or send me an email. I'll put my email address in the chat so that everybody has it. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Emily and Peter.
Thank you, Hugh. We're going to divide this presentation into two parts, a boring part and a fun part. The boring part will be that we're going to go through about 7 or 8 slides with the basic rules of the road, and Emily and I will present them to the group as we go forward. Then the fun part is that we have some scenarios that we will then discuss with you. We'd like you to interact with us. If we were in a room, I'd divide you in a half and half, and one would be the plaintiff, one would be the defendant. But instead, we'll ask you to become involved and express your opinions. So let's jump to the first slide, which is entitled Board Duties.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Emily Abels. Really nice to be with you all today. So this, as the big arrow suggests on this slide, our focus today in this presentation is thinking about the legal and ethical integrity and the important components for the structure and operating of a board. However, of course, as you can see on this list, there are lots of other important jobs that the board takes on and important facets of nonprofit administration. So obviously this is just the beginning, and all these other pieces are incredibly important as well. We'll focus in next on our legal and ethical duties.
Okay, so the next slide is today's agenda, and really the key to being on a board of a nonprofit is a business judgment rule. You must act in good faith. You can't profit unnecessarily from your activity as a board member. You must inquire with skill and diligence. That means if you have board members that sit mute for the entire year and don't ask a question, they're really not carrying out their duties. You need ordinary prudence, which just means to be reasonable about it. And then, of course, the three duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. I always like to say that a board member has a fiduciary duty. If someone hires someone to do a task, then it's a business transaction duty. But if someone manages people's money, if you receive donations and use it either for the purposes of your charity or to make donations on your own, then you have a higher calling, a higher responsibility than merely a business transaction. Go ahead, Emily.
So the statute that's relevant for I always love the Welcome to Pennsylvania. The statute that's relevant for nonprofits and other corporate entities in Pennsylvania is the BCL, the Business Corporation Law. This sets out a lot of the very basic requirements and that, of course, you need to comply with. First, obviously, you have to have an address or somebody to receive service for you here in Pennsylvania. The law also covers the legal rights that the organization has to buy and sell property, have other businesses, sue and be sued, etc., all under Pennsylvania law and jurisdiction. Of course, you also need to, under the law, articulate your name and a clear purpose. You have to then, of course, file with the Department of Revenue and the State Business Division. Then, of course, as you all know, since you're here, there needs to be a board of directors, including officers. And the bylaws should really lay out all of the details and color in that piece, including, terms for officers, how you vote, what the annual meeting notice requirements are, all of the pieces that really govern how the organization runs. As you'll see here, there are 3 positions which are required: a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. You are permitted to have an organization wherein one person holds all 3. Of course, ideally, you would have a more diverse set of officers, but of course, that is the legal minimum there. So the big picture here is that if there's a lack of compliance with state statute or law here, there is liability on a criminal or civil basis. Civil, of course, being the monetary penalties, which of course are scary for any individual and especially for an organization that's trying to do good work. You don't want to be either unknowingly or sort of just being sloppy and opening yourself and your organization up to liability that could cost a lot of money and or the end of the organization itself. So I am confident that because all of you are here, you are operating well within the confines of the law. But of course, that's the very 30,000-foot level on that.
There's one piece of that last page I just wanted to accentuate, and that is have bylaws and operate with them. I mean, no one's more bored than trying to hear someone grind away at the bylaws every year. But really, the executive director, if you have the luxury of having an executive director, should really see that as his or her roadmap and hold the other directors to the responsibility to carry out whatever is said in there. I mean, for example, does it require 2 people to sign a check? Or is it 2 people sign a check over $1,000? Does it require 2 people to sign a lease? Only 1 person to sign a lease? All those sort of nitty-gritty things which are annoying, but really are what hold a nonprofit together.
And to that end, that also means that you should be updating your bylaws, right? There may be situations that aren't contemplated by the organization when those are first drafted, and those bylaws need to be regularly reviewed and updated to be most effective for the organization.
So I'm not going to repeat the next page because it talks about the business judgment rule. But again, suffice it to say that you have both a business responsibility and also a fiduciary responsibility to use your good faith in carrying out the terms of the charitable intent of the organization. And that you don't have to be an expert, but you have to, you have to think about the consequences and as one of my friends says, apply the smell test. If it doesn't appear to be right, then it's not right, and you have to change a different attitude.
So as the slide indicates, your duty of good faith breaks down into really 3 separate duties: your duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. The duty of care really rests on this idea that you have an obligation to, as Peter said earlier, to ask questions, to figure out what the facts and situation are, to understand what's going on, and to make informed decisions based on that. The board should be looking for independent or third-party advice if there's if it's not clear or this is stepping out of the wheelhouse of the board into things like legal advice or tax accountant advice, all those things. and furthermore, so that's about your decision making, right? You need to do all that due diligence to make good decisions as a board member, asking the right questions and trying to ascertain all the information you need to make the right decisions. And then the other piece is that there are two facets of legal compliance that are not just about your decision making as a board member, but for the board and organizational health. You need to make sure that there are accurate information and reporting systems that exist within the organization, and that there are ways to bring up board members who are to flag board members when the organization is sort of teetering into legally dubious territory. So that doesn't mean that you need to have a particular system in sort of a digital realm, that kind of system, but just to make sure that there are perhaps a structure that works this way, where there are committees, there are officers, there are multiple levels of checks and balances where folks are reviewing information, asking the right questions, and circling back, following up, making sure that all of that due diligence is happening. And as Peter said, somebody paying attention to make sure that if there are board members that don't seem to be exercising their duties here, that is something that gets reported up to your governance or your nominating committees to make sure that those roles are filled with folks who are going to exercise that duty appropriately.
So what Emily's slide means also is that you need to have some sort of a periodic financial reporting system for the board members. And you can present it with variances. So for example, if the executive director's salary has gone up by 100%, then that variance should appear in that monthly or every 3-month statement. So the board members then have the obligation to ask why that is. I mean, I'm using a silly example, but you have to have adequate accounting that can be informational to the board members, and then obviously then can be used to prepare the tax return going forward on a yearly basis. Okay, so the next slide talks about duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. Sounds like we're in a dog training class here, but the board clearly cannot use its position, or the members of the board cannot use its position to personally benefit from the activities of the nonprofit. You can't be buying land that the nonprofit owns at a discount. You can't, if you do offer your services to the nonprofit, it must be at a reduced rate. Otherwise, you're opening yourself up to really not only your own personal liability, but also calling the whole board's operation into question. You can engage in financial transactions, that is correct, but it has to be disclosed, it has to be approved by the directors, and anything that creates a whiff of it being self-dealing has to be avoided. Confidentiality is very important. You cannot disclose anything that goes on in the boardroom outside of the boardroom, and you can't give the impression of disclosing it. We have a rule in our law firm that, for example, if you're involved with a situation where a client's getting a divorce, you can't say to yourself, well, it's a matter of public record, so I can now tell my neighbor that Joan's getting a divorce. No, that gives the impression of disclosing a confidence, and you simply cannot do that. The duty of obedience is, again, we're being repetitive here, but you need to comply with all the federal, state, and local rules to the best of your knowledge.
And that last piece I think also is important, is that you're faithful to the mission, the organization's mission and vision statements. And that really, another silly example, that means that if you are an organization founded for the purpose of preventing homelessness, and then one day you decide the board would like to start being an animal rescue, that pivot is not acceptable, because then of course you're not being loyal to the purpose or the donors who provided funds for something else, and not being faithful to the mission and vision. So you have to keep those pieces up to date as well, make sure you're complying with all of that. So you may, I imagine many of your board members, you may already know about the directors and officers liability insurance policy on the board that you're currently serving on. I have a colleague who, even if it's an organization she loves, and this is good advice, will not agree to serve in any capacity until she receives a copy of the coverage for D&O. The point of this is that it protects individual board members, particularly in the instance of a civil suit. It also protects employees and volunteers. The important piece to remember is that this may seem like something sort of niche and maybe beyond the scope of what's necessary, but usually it's pretty cheap to pay for and really worth it in that way, in my opinion. It's not a huge expense and therefore takes that risk away. If you're an organization without any employees, the risk of claims against board members is low because there are so many employment related claims that are made. However, as I just said, the premium is also low, so it's worthwhile, I think, for every organization to have it. When I see a question in the chat, let me just pull up our chat here so we have a bigger view. If the board is not compliant, who is the next entity to complain to? Got it. So
To erase it.
there are. So if that's something that is coming up because you're feeling like the board is not fulfilling its duties in one way or the other, that's really tricky. We've had clients who are in this situation, because it might be that that's coming at the executive director's vision, or that might be the directors of the board, the officers rather. But I think that it's important to find whoever you can to try to make that aware. And then if that's not going to change, then you probably need to excuse yourself if you feel like, or resign from the board if you feel like things are really getting into sticky territory.
Yeah, there is no greater entity to appeal to if you think the board's non-compliant. And in the situation with sexual harassment, the board has to have an established sexual harassment policy. So that if there are any employees of the board that feel like they're being sexually harassed, there's a methodology where they apply to the director, or if not the director, the chairman of the board or something, so that they can be heard outside of the employment context. But if you don't have that sort of policy, you're opening up the board to a claim, which would result in, unfortunately, a claim against your D&O coverage. So I know that you're thinking, gee, it sounds like something I do for a living. Why am I spending all this time on it? But if you are going to accept people's money, and if you're going to tell IRS that you're a 501c3 organization, unfortunately, there's a lot of baggage that goes along with it. And really the purpose of today's presentation is to give you our thoughts as to, you can't eliminate the baggage, you can't eliminate the potential harm, but you can certainly protect yourself. And that's really what you need to do. So board liability basics. All right. If you're having an employee lawsuit, it often comes from the director of the association. You must make sure that all taxes are paid. Trust me when I tell you that if for some reason the board gets sloppy and doesn't guarantee that the withholding taxes are paid, then they will personally assess the board members. And they're not polite about it. So I would urge you to make sure that you have a competent CPA and that you have I know that Emily 4 or 5 slides ago said that it's legal for someone to be the president, vice president, and treasurer. And that's true, but it's lousy. And so you need to have someone that, you need to have at least 2 people in those 2 roles. The other board liability basics, and again, we're being repetitive, but forgive us, is you need to avoid non-management. It's really important that you have directors that attend the meetings and directors that become involved. They don't have to be overly involved, but they have to at least put their 2 cents in at these meetings, because if they don't, they are really not upholding their part of the bargain. Again, mismanagement, same thing said in a different way, is managing other than ineptly, incompetently, and dishonestly. And the final piece is a conflict of interest, which is a situation in which a fiduciary, there's that word again, contrary to the obligation of the duty to act for the benefit, exploits the relationship for personal gain. Okay, so that, I'm sorry to buzz through that for you, but that's important for us all to be reminded of what's going on. And also it's important that if you are able to print up this handout, that you have it to look at and talk about at the next board meeting. It's just something that is sort of not the licensed thing to talk about, but I think we have to talk about these things, and we have to come up with some practices that we can document. Speaking of which, it's great for me to tell you that you need to uphold all these duties of care, but make sure that someone is on your board that's writing them down. So if you want to buy a piece of property from the board and the board thinks it's worth $100,000 and you get it appraised $100,000 and you pay $100,000, that all should be in the minutes. Because if it is not, then it can be unfortunately turned around somehow, and that's not a good play for you to have.
When in doubt, put it in the minutes.
When in doubt, write it out. Okay, so we have some scenarios here. As my law school professor used to say, there's no good answer, but yes, there really is. And so we're getting the first set of questions deals with fiduciary responsibility, then fundraising, and then personnel. So let's jump in here. I like Steve Roberts. Can you hear me, Steve? There he is.
Yeah, yes, I can, Peter.
Steve, why don't we start with you? Why don't you read scenario number 1 in the fiduciary responsibility section, and then give us your opinion.
Okay. It says the board began to hold its monthly meetings on Zoom during COVID. A board member who had missed more than half of the board meetings pre-COVID is now missing most all of the board meetings. The board member makes an extremely large annual donation to the annual fund. What should the board do? And you want my answer?
Yes.
You need to have a conversation with that person and say, thank you for your donations and we hope they continue. However, we need involved board members. And I've been in a similar situation and had a conversation with the board member, and fortunately his response was, do you have somebody replace me? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay. So it was a friendly ending. But it seems to me if they're not attending, then they're not doing all the things that you've listed that a board member is supposed to do, and you need to address that.
Did he terminate his annual donation?
No.
You had the best of both worlds then.
It was really his wife's donation, but it continued.
Well done, Steve. Appreciate that. Okay, Stephen Carroll, can you hear me?
I can.
Would you mind reading number 2?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one comment to the last one. The words extremely large annual donation are eye-catching. I wouldn't be too quick to kick somebody out who did that. We've had conversations, can extremely large donor be a committee position? The answer is really no. But I'd work overtime to make sure and maintain that, because as a nonprofit, that's important. Number 2, a nonprofit is have.
Steve, one other thing, what we've done in the past with one situation was to ask the person to step down from the board but retain the title. like of council or honorary director,
Right.
so that he or she feels involved. Although I would sell to them and say, you don't want to have the liability. So go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, you can't purchase the position, and it's not a lifetime achievement award. So how do you find the right place or get them involved?
Yep.
A nonprofit received a large gift from a donor earmarked for a special, oh, we changed pages.
Number
Oh.
two. Number two, fiduciary responsibility.
Okay,
Would you mind
we
sending
did,
us back?
Come back, you.
There
There you go. No,
there we
not-
go.
we go. Yeah.
Thank you.
A nonprofit is having an issue recruiting enough volunteers to help. Staff is doing all that it can to fill in amidst their other work responsibilities, but they cannot. A board member offers themselves and their extended family to provide the services and below the typical market cost, but still for a fee. What should the board do? The board should say no. This is a volunteer organization. We appreciate your willingness to pitch in this way, and I think I'd still push on recruiting volunteers. There's a real conflict in that one.
I agree, but play it this way. What if the board member said, okay, I'll resign, but then you could hire me to, and my family to do the work for the board? How would you take that?
I would still say no.
Okay,
Now, you know, we're talking about providing our services. If you,
right?
if this individual's business is in supplying these services and you want to employ their business at below market cost, then as was said earlier, you document that business arrangement. But I think as a family arrangement, I'd be a little skittish around that one.
What other folks had experience with this or have ideas about how to answer this one?
This is Steve Roberts. I wonder, in that situation, if you put it out for bid and asked people to bid on providing this service, and if then the board member's family comes in at a low price, does that make it okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good idea, Steve, that it would be something that, you know, you document that you had solicited other folks to put in bids for it, and then you're taking the most competitive offer. Of course, the context, as Stephen also said, the context is key here. If this is a volunteer position, but it's an organization that has staff, you know, what really is this work that needs to be done and the service that's provided and who should be doing it? That's kind of key here. But I think if you are documenting it and it's below a typical market rate and they're not getting rich off of it, that it's possible to make this work. But, yeah.
So Linda Holcomb, you read number 3?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So you serve on the board of a large, well-managed 501c3 organization. The CEO has decided to run for borough council, a part-time position. Their leadership on borough council could provide tremendous benefits to the nonprofit. What concerns does the board need to address? How much can the board support the CEO's run for borough council? Do I answer that?
Sure.
This happened in Westchester, so we're not
Yeah.
making this stuff up.
Well, I didn't know that this is a part-time position. I didn't know that it was paid, actually, not in the town that I live in. So I guess I'm not sure. I don't see, I see a conflict, but it's two different things. But I see the benefit. I'm not sure. Sorry.
Oh, the question leaves a lot of questions unanswered. I mean, you know, really, you need to know what the goal is of this well-managed 501c3. But this actually happened in Westchester, and the answer was that the board itself has only the right to follow the mission of their charitable organization, and although the directors could certainly feel free to, you know, support, endorse, and contribute to the candidate, the fact that that the board would endorse this candidate for the position would be the detriment of other candidates. So apart from the possibility it might cause problems for the board, it also is really outside of the scope of most 501c3s. Now, there are lobbying groups. I think they're 50c4s or 5s. I never remember that, but which can do that, but this is not the case. So in that particular case, it was decided the board could not take a position as a board.
I have a question. So this is Debbie Dart, sorry. When does that become an issue with your 501c3? If we're not allowed to do political things as a 501c3 because the IRS says so, where's that line?
Well, if you're making individual donations, if you're doing something that has no relation to your role on the board of this 501c3, that's still permissible.
I mean, let's take a controversial topic. Let's say that that we're talking about the board of Planned Parenthood, and the person running for borough council doesn't see that issue the same way that members of the board of Planned Parenthood see it, but that it still seems like it might be effective for the board to back this person. I think that's a problem. I think that I mean, you raise a good point, Debbie. It does seem like IRS is dictating what you can and cannot do. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I guess the answer is that overall you have a bigger obligation to your mission than you do to use the power of the 501c3 to back a particular candidate.
Hey, Peter, it's Chris over at Crime Victim Center. I think also thrown into this conversation is how the nonprofit is funded. At CVC, we receive federal funds. So I have to sign things that say we will not endorse candidates. We will not, we're allowed to advocate. We're not allowed to lobby. So depending on how that nonprofit is funded, that might also dictate what the board can and can't do.
Absolutely.
Good point.
This is Ed from the Oxford Arts Alliance. I would think that the conflict of interest is as severe, if not more so, in the opposite direction. If a person is on the borough council, what responsibilities could they have to the organization?
The other tricky thing too is when the CEO is out and about. Because Deb Ryan ran for DA while she worked for CVC. So the other question was, you got to keep that separate from your job. You can't be campaigning for yourself
Right.
while you're at an event representing, your nonprofit. So that's also something I think that the board would need to address, is being clear about what can and can't be done on company time, so to speak.
Nor could the borough council person give unfair advantage to the organization, to the 501c3.
I mean, let's face it, a lot of nonprofits rent at little or no cost space from townships and boroughs to conduct their activities, and you don't want to in any way jeopardize that by having the borough look like they're favoring one entity over another. Okay, Christine, you want to read number 4? You can skip to just the first paragraph and the last paragraph.
Sure. When COVID struck, the senior staff and board of a nonprofit with a $20 million annual operating budget implemented immediate program cuts and closures. It laid off personnel whose work will be impossible because of social distancing, and cut admin staff. These moves cut the annual operating budget in half. The board also agreed to tap the nonprofit's $5 million in financial reserve to provide basic services. Throughout COVID, they were partnering strategically and significantly with other nonprofits to show the community is open and able to help. Now that COVID has become normalized and manageable, the nonprofit continues to provide basic service to a grateful constituent group, raise modest funds, and hold on for dear life. The reserves are almost fully depleted, and the annual operating budget has been pared to a shadow of its former self. What's the board to do?
Can you tell this is also based on a real story?
So this one kind of leaves me with a few more questions before answers. paired to a shadow of its former self, $20 million is a huge budget. So paired to a shadow of its former self could still be $2 million, which is still, for a local nonprofit, in my opinion, a significant budget. So I'd be wondering, what that was. And then basic services, there's a lot of organizations providing basic services, fortunately, here in Chester County. And if they've been partnering strategically with them before, and their budget is such a, gets down to a level that perhaps merging makes sense. That might be something that the board would want to consider. Is it, can they merge with another organization, or can they stick to a smaller geographic location and merge with a larger organization? Yeah, those would be my thoughts as far as what they got to do something. That's for darn sure. And just being strategic about what their options are. And looking at their funding services. This doesn't really say where their funding services is coming from, but diversifying where they're getting funding from can also be an option.
Yeah, that's a great answer, because what you're really getting at is what's the responsibility of the board, given the current situation, to continue on the mission of the now depleted 501c3. And if in fact someone else has taken up their space, you merge. And if they can't go much more past the shadow of their former self, and maybe you find a way to take what few assets you have left and add it to a complementary organization and be done with it.
Yeah, the expression is no money, no mission. And they're clearly hitting the point where they have no money. They've got to seriously reassess what their future is going to look like.
Okay, let's flip the page to fundraising. Some interesting social media questions there. Debbie, you want to read number one on fundraising and donor accountability?
Sorry. Staff uses social media, especially Facebook and GoFundMe, to encourage involvement and donations. More and more donations are coming in online from social media. A board member wonders whether this raises any legal issues. Well, we actually had a discussion about this because to raise money, you need to be registered in the state that you're asking for the donations. And so do you have to be registered in every state from which people might be donating?
What did you decide as a board?
Oh, well, we don't, I wasn't on that board. I just know they talked about it. I don't know what they decided. But it was, I thought it was a good question. I'm sorry.
You need to be registered in every state. And so if you're running a GoFundMe's page and you get money from Nevada, unless you're registered in Nevada, that's really not following the rules. It's a real tough thing, because today with Venmo and everything else, people don't want to be bothered with writing checks. They just want to send money. But technically, any 501c3 that accepts those funds, and I'm sure there are a lot that do, are doing it at their own risk. And it's, it means that, like, the national organizations, like the Red Cross, for example, have robust programs where they're involved in every state and they can take money. But if you get $100,000 in Louisiana and you're running a Chester County nonprofit, you run the risk of violating Louisiana law, right or wrong.
Are there any other legal issues you need to be worried about if your money's coming online?
Well, anonymity. I mean, who's giving it to you? Is it clean money? I guess is a fair way of saying it. Is anyone being somehow playing games, trying to hide money from the IRS? All those issues are also current.
But now with social media, like if you take a look, most of the nonprofits have their, donate. Then, I mean, everyone donates, and do we really go and look where is the money coming from? Like sometimes with Venmo or other ways of donating, it's hard to know.
I agree.
Mhm.
It's an unresolved issue. I mean, I think that it hasn't really hit the courts yet. I hope it never does. But it's where the law has not kept up with the realities of society, frankly.
I have heard of organizations who have some kind of language next to their donate button that says, we are accepting donations from residents in these states, the ones that they've paid to register in. Of course, that doesn't really, as Peter's already outlined, the safest thing is to be registered everywhere so that you're prepared to receive money. However, that's a major financial commitment for the organization. So it's not to be done lightly. So there's some, as we've just mentioned, there's some tension there to figure out how to do this the best way. I think, of course, it just gets back to the most effective way to manage this process is more person-to-person fundraising. So you do know where your money's coming from, and it's probably within a community where you are already going to be registered.
And Peter and Emily, the registration, isn't that where we're allowed to solicit donations, not necessarily where we're able to accept them from?
And what's the difference? I mean, if you have a web page that says, please donate to the Chester County Art Council, and it's on the web, it's on the internet. If I'm sitting in Dubuque, Iowa, and I open up that page and I see it, then you're soliciting me.
Yeah, but I'm not intentionally reaching out to the entire country with,
Fair
that's,
enough.
that's not like, I'm not like sending letters to Nevada or putting ads out there or targeting that, their residents.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why also some organizations are careful about when they figure out where their money is coming from. They don't hold on to the addresses and add them to their listserv unless they are states in which they're registered, because you don't want to be then going back to solicit donations from people that might be outside the scope of where you're registered. But yeah, it is. I mean, I think that gets, just your question, Chris, gets into the argument that could be made between you and Peter about this in a court. What does the solicitation really mean? Is it actually a direct solicitation? Is somebody forwarding or sending you a direct message on Instagram? What becomes a solicitation is sort of the active question, I think.
Okay, now I'll read the next one. It's a real softball. The nonprofit received a large gift from a donor last year, earmarked for a special new project. The funded project never materialized since insufficient funds were raised, and the donated money remains unspent. The nonprofit would like to spend the remaining money on a new, different initiative. Can they? What should the board do? What do you think, group?
We had this in one of mine that I've been involved with. They got funding for a project that didn't work out, and they went back to the donor and asked, would they like the money back, or would they like to have us move it into operating or another piece of the whatever was going on. So
And
they actually said yes, we could move it, and that was fine with them, and we got it in writing.
Oh, I remember that, Debbie.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was going to say that, yeah, always go back to the donor, right, and ask and say, this is what's going on. Can we spend it, or do you want it back? Hopefully they don't want it, and they don't want it back, really.
Yeah, it is loosely defined a restricted gift. So they have to get into, they have to get beyond the restriction or return it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an easy one, I think. Okay, number 3, executive director is thrilled to report to the board that an anonymous donor is contemplating a $1 million gift to help with building renovations. The donor's only condition is that no one knows who made the gift. As a 501c3 nonprofit public charity, must the board know the name of the anonymous donor?
Anyone dealt with this in their organization or on
Good
their
problem to have.
Yeah.
See Linda nodding, yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, this has happened multiple times.
And what did you all do?
So I don't know if they have dealt the right way, but they tell us the name, and then, of course, they say this is anonymous, it stays here. So not to the public. So that's how it
It
happened.
stays within the board?
Yes, in the executive board within the officials.
Does everyone agree with that?
Doesn't this have,
Strikes me as a little dangerous.
I don't know, does this have to be reported on the 990?
Yes, it
And
does,
but as anonymous or with the name?
with the
Know the
name. You have no
Right.
choice.
Well, then it's public knowledge.
Well, right, exactly. So you could say, you know, the board may not need to know, perhaps whoever is responsible for that gift may be able to remain anonymous sort of as much as possible. But it's just as you pointed out, Debbie, there's no hiding from the 990. So if somebody wanted to look that up, they could. Ed, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, we had I wouldn't call it $1 million donation, but we had a small donation that was made by someone who wanted to remain anonymous, and he sent the money through his attorney. So what I believe, and I'm doing this from memory, I believe what we reported was the name of the law firm who actually handed us the money.
So how does he write that off his taxes?
I have no idea. That's a good question.
Yeah,
Well,
we've also had a similar situation where we have a DAF that has given us money anonymously on behalf of someone, like the DAF money manager has given us money from somebody's DAF anonymously.
Huh, that's interesting. And so the manager would not tell you what the donor advised fund was. Just say,
Correct.
here's a check for $10,000.
Correct.
Interesting.
Another thought on that, a question really, could somebody set up, say, an endowment through the Chester County Community Foundation and then have the income from that go to their nonprofit and keep that anonymous?
What do you think, Stephanie? What do you think, Hugh?
I apologize. I am multitasking, so I did not hear the question.
So Stephanie, somebody wants to donate $1 million, but they want to put it in an endowed fund with the community foundation and the income then to be paid out to the nonprofit. Could they keep it anonymous at that point?
Yes, they can.
To the point where, again, it wouldn't have to be put on a 990.
Okay, so how it's paid out is really immaterial, but if it went through a foundation, it could be kept anonymous.
Didn't know that. It's interesting.
That's a question, but
I'm
made it sound like a statement.
99% sure that is correct.
Steph, I think you're right, because we've received donations like that before, and they won't even tell me who it's from. It's like, this is anonymous, it's from this charitable fund, and you can send a thank you to us, but that's all you're getting from us. Now, they haven't been for $1 million, unfortunately, but
Hope springs eternal.
Thank you.
Okay, Christine, you wanna share the burden here? We want to read number 4.
Sure. You serve on the board of a 501c3 sports nonprofit that runs youth basketball leagues. The nonprofit rents the gym for parties. The bookkeeper says that the party rental fees further the basketball program, maintain the gym, and pay staff. A new board member asks, should we do this? Won't it result in unrelated business income tax? I don't know a whole lot about unrelated business income tax because we don't have any income, but it's curious that you gave me this question, Peter, because we have a parking lot behind our building that drives me up a wall with who can park there and who can't. And some of the team has jokingly said, why don't we just rent it out so that we don't have to worry about who parks there anymore? And my first thought was, wouldn't that be unrelated business income tax if we did that? So I don't know. I mean, it has to be unrelated. So in like my scenario, I feel like it would be unrelated because renting a parking lot has nothing to do with what we do. But in this one, I see an argument that, you know, it's maintaining the gym and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure. I think you'd have a better argument that it's not unrelated in that scenario.
I mean, if you had a gym and your purpose of charity was to benefit handicapped children, and you use the gym to have a basketball league for kids that were somehow handicapped, that would be perfect. But if you're renting it out to an adult league and the money comes in, it would be subject to the unrelated business income tax, and that's a pretty negative thing to have hit your books. So
So it sounds like you shouldn't be renting that parking lot, Chris. We can cross that off your list for you.
Yeah, I kind of already crossed it off for that reason, but plus I want to park there. So.
Definitely.
Christina, could you read number 5?
Sure. A board member purchases a significant auction item at the nonprofit's event on their credit card. The next day, the board member returns the item to the nonprofit, telling the executive director they want a refund on their credit card charge. The executive director calls the board chair for help.
This happened to me. I wasn't the person that bought the item, but what's interesting was what I didn't put into the scenario was the person called up and said, I didn't mean to do it, and I was drunk, which is an interesting defense to present to a charitable gift. So the executive director has called you, Christina, to get your opinion as whether or not we should eliminate this from the credit card charge. What do you tell him or her?
I mean, I think that you have to, give back the refund the credit card charge, but I think that warrants a conversation with the board member, obviously. And then I think the next question is like, is there a way to then re-auction that item, or somehow strategically work to not make that gift regain that gift. So for example, like we've had situations where we've auctioned things off and an individual has donated it back after like the item back so that we could then auction it again. So you could do a similar thing like that.
In this particular case, it was I forget, a week in Tuscany or a week in France or something. And, we had an audience of several hundred people who all drank too much, including me, bidding on it. And so then the person reneged the next day, and the executive director said to me, well, how are we going to reconvene 200 people to bid on a week in Tuscany? So it wasn't really didn't lend itself to being re-advertised or resold. But in the case in this particular case, the executive director and the board decided to give back eliminate the charge and just try to get it done next year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they could have called you and said, would you like the trip instead now?
Yeah, that's right.
And depending on how it was, oh, sorry.
Pardon me?
I was just gonna say, depending on how it was, you could always offer it to the next bidder. Like if you know who the next bidder was, if it was a live auction or if it was a silent auction, you could say, oh, it turns out they passed. Do you want it?
Yep, that's a good idea. Ed?
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say I volunteer to take the trip to Tuscany.
You're a giver, Ed. You're a giver. I appreciate that. Okay. Just we have a little bit more time here. Just to go to the personnel section. I guess I'm going to read number 2. Steve Roberts, how about you? Read number 2 on scenario for personnel.
Okay, the executive director admits to the board chair that they are finding it difficult to monitor and evaluate the quality of staff's work with constituents. As much of it is private, controversial, or conversational, and does not have immediate impact. What concerns does the board need to address?
Yeah, my thought was that maybe this might be a health care provider, and they're worried about HIPAA and what they have to do to navigate around HIPAA when they are asking for casual conversations. What does someone think about that?
Well, and Peter, what is meant by constituents? Is that clients?
I think so.
That's a tough one, but it seems to me you need to know about the quality of your work. Somehow you need to
You need feedback.
Yeah. You need to find a way.
And that could be a survey done, by the organization to the constituents. An anonymous survey about quality of staff and interactions or whatever the mission is. So that you're still able to get the information, but maybe not get names and that kind of stuff. I think there's several ways to get that done.
The other part of the reason being, okay, so it's private, if HIPAA, that's an issue, but the next part where it's conversational and does not have immediate impact, that's weak.
I would say any question of service to constituents does have immediate impact and would need to be addressed right away.
Yeah, there's something going on here.
We can even go deeper and find out if we have an employee handbook. Like, do we have job descriptions? Are they up to date? How often do we do self-evaluations, employee evaluations, client satisfaction surveys? So it's like so much investigation here.
The other thing I'd want to know is this a change? Was the executive director previously able to monitor quality and all that?
Mm-hmm.
So something's going on.
Well, at the top level, my question is, the organization hopefully has a strategic plan, and they've got some SMART goals built around their plan goals. This is something that ought to be measured at that level.
Has to be, really.
Mm-hmm.
I also am curious about the use of the word admits, like it's something that they're doing wrong. Like, is this a new thing? Like, have they never been able to do this? That to me doesn't suggest a very good relationship between the executive director and their board chair. If they feel like they're admitting, as opposed to just reaching out for help and saying, hey, this is a little bit tough because of XYZ. Can you help me problem solve this?
Or also it could be a problem between the executive director and their relationship to their staff, which also would be important for the board to know and something to deal with right away.
Okay,
I actually have a question about that.
Go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, please.
Does the board do like sort of oh my gosh, I forgot the word, like some sort of evaluation on the executive director and then the executive director on the staff? Is that how it is?
Yes, that's how
Okay.
it should be.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, like many attorneys, including Christine and Emily, we're time obsessed. It's 1 o'clock. Thank you for your participation in this group. If you have any questions that we haven't discussed and you want to email Emily or myself, you can see our email addresses in the front of it. And I'd like to thank Hugh and Stephanie for making this possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter and
Thank
Emily.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a great
Bye.
day.
Would it
Bye,
be possible
guys.
to get a PDF of the presentation?
Yes, I will be sending it out either this afternoon or tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh.
Thanks, guys.
Sure, no problem. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I have a question for Hugh.
Yes.
If you have 1 minute.